morning, everybody. What a room. Thank you all for coming here, and it is such a pleasure to be in Amsterdam. Holy cow, what a beautiful, amazing, fantastic city. I hope to live here one day. I rode my bike here like a local. It was amazing, and it's wonderful to see you all. So I'm going to talk today about something that's very important to us, which is the connection between purpose, mission, and strategy, and how, by way of connecting those things well or not so well, you can help your company align its efforts and make hard decisions easily, or not do that so much and have everything be hard. I'm from Union Square Ventures. We're a venture capital firm based in New York City. We've got companies on the West Coast, in the Midwest, in Canada, on the East Coast, in Europe. We've been investing for about 12 years, and have invested in about 100 companies, everything from tiny seed stage companies with 2 founders, all the way up to big public companies like Twitter and Etsy and Twilio. So we've got the whole range, and we work with companies as they grow up that whole scale. And this is a picture from last week. We had our annual CEO Summit, which we run every year, and it's kind of like a support group for CEOs. Everybody in our portfolio comes, and we bring them all together. It's very casual, and we work out. They suggest topics that they want to talk about, and they help each other. It's like a peer group. You can see in this picture all the CEOs with a woman named Angela Duckworth, who was our guest, who I'll talk about in a minute, but she wrote a great book called Grit that we've learned a lot from. One of the topics that came up at this year's CEO Summit was telling the story of your company. How do you present the company vision? And Brian asked how many founders are in the room. Maybe I'll ask it again. How many of you are founders, since there's a lot of new people? Holy cow, that is just awesome. How many of you think that you're doing a good job telling the story of your company internally and externally? That's good, and I'm not to put pressure on you. How many of you think that it's really hard and you're not sure if you're doing a good job? Yeah, and I would say that most of the CEOs at our summit were in the second camp, where they're like, man, this is hard. Even from some of the most successful companies, it's like, man, how do you tell that story? Why is that important? How do you communicate it? What is it? How does that connect to all the things that we're doing? It's just really hard. And leading up to this year's summit, we asked everybody a pre-work question, and we said, what is your company's mission in 10 words or less? And this was not what is your formal public mission statement, but this is like, just quickly, what is your mission? And they said things like, expand human ingenuity to the sky, help people be more free and safe on the internet, spark a world of community where people feel powerful and connected and welcomed, give people insight into what is going on with their bodies, help students learn, empower lawyers to fight the best fight for their clients and our rights, give people skills that help them increase their livelihoods, make teaching fun and effective, advocate for the value of artists and creativity to society, give people more time. And you may be thinking, isn't that just a bunch of fluffy nonsense, sort of feel-good talk? And I would argue that that is not true. There's actually a lot of nuance in a lot of those statements, and coming up with that sense of mission and purpose and then connecting it with the strategy is critical to making sure things don't go way off the rails. Because when you start something new, everybody's looking for that blue ocean. I'm entering a new market. I can change the world. We can do anything. We're just using software and the internet. Everything is possible. The sky is the limit. And that is incredibly empowering and exciting, but it's also kind of terrifying because all of a sudden the clouds come in and it gets dark, and that beautiful blue ocean kind of feels scary and dark. And as you're going through the dark times, and there are lots of them, you need the North Star to guide you and help you make all of the decisions that come up along the way. And there's lots of really hard decisions. Somebody on Twitter earlier this morning said something like kittens or puppies or chocolate or bod. These are the hard decisions that we need to sort of work on. But every team in every company every day is thinking about, what product are we investing in? Who are we hiring? What are we emphasizing? What are we not doing? It's just really hard, and it'll make your brain melt if you don't have a framework to help you make those decisions. It'll waste a lot of energy. Or another failure mode is that people think that they know what the purpose and mission is, but they think different things. I was looking on the Noun project, which is one of my favorite websites, and unfortunately they don't have an icon for clusterfuck, but this is the closest that I could find. And it's that feeling where it's like, oh yeah, I'm driving the truck this way and I'm driving the truck that way, and if any of you have ever been in a company where that's the vibe, it sucks. It's the worst. You can't get anything done, and worse, you get anti-progress done. And that's so easy when people are not aligned around the purpose and the mission. Another failure mode is what I call the mad scientist problem, especially with technologists who love to build things. If they don't feel connected enough to the purpose and the mission, they'll get connected to some other project, and they'll start building stuff that's cool. And that can go way off the rails and get way expensive, way fast. It happened at my last company. You don't want that. And just generally, purpose and mission and having a sense of those things connected to strategy is about morale. When people feel rudderless, morale goes to the shitter, they get grumpy, they get upset, and it's just bad for everybody. So these are the reasons why this is so important. And the observation that I've made is that the companies that have the strongest connection between purpose and strategy are the best at making tough calls. And tough calls, like really tough calls, I don't know, there's lots of really hard, tough calls, and the day-to-day tough calls, and overall have the best sense of productivity. So that's what I want to talk about today is some ways to strengthen that connection. So purpose, mission, and strategy. These terms can get a little fuzzy. People are always like, I don't know the difference between vision and mission and values, and I kind of think it doesn't matter exactly what labels you use. The point is that you need to know, why do we exist? What is the world that we want to live in? That our company is going to help create, and then who do we serve? What are we here to do today and in the next year? And who are our people, and what are we doing for them? And then how do we do it? I love seeing the cameras go up on the slides. How do we do it? What are the things that we do? And these things tie together, and if they don't support each other from purpose to mission to strategy, then you have a problem. So what I want to talk about are 5 ways that we've observed that are helpful in connecting purpose, mission, and strategy. I'm not suggesting that any one of these is a silver bullet. They are just some ideas, so take that with a grain of salt. First one, find your true north, but be flexible. The be flexible is the important part, and the true north is also the important part. They're both important. Most of you are familiar with Foursquare. When I mention Foursquare to people, the first reaction I get is often like, oh yeah, I remember those guys. They kind of had a company for a while. They're kind of struggling, right? That's a reasonable narrative. A couple years ago, Foursquare was in a tough spot where, as a consumer app, they had kind of plateaued. They had raised a bunch of money at a really high valuation, but it wasn't like the everything. And then something happened. Dennis Crowley, who was the founder of Foursquare, brought in a new CEO, Jeff Glick. Jeff was more of a business guy. And they had kind of a come-to-Jesus moment as a company where they said, this consumer thing can't be the everything, and we're going to have a platform. And it's going to be an SDK and an API that powers location, and we're going to build a business around that, a data business around location. And there was this real rift within the company between the Dennis people and the Jeff people who were like, no, we're a awesome consumer product company. Or, what is this sort of a business thing that you want us to do? And it created a little bit of civil war. And what ended up happening at Foursquare was that one day, Dennis stood up in front of the whole company, and he said, the purpose of Foursquare was to make cities more delightful for people to use. That is why we exist. And we thought that building a consumer app was the best way for us to accomplish that. But actually, you know what? It turns out that by powering location awareness across many, many, many apps, we can accomplish that goal in an even more powerful way. And for him to get up in front of the whole company and say, actually, guys, here's our purpose, and now here's the strategy that's going to support that purpose, that was like a watershed moment for aligning the company around a new direction. And that new direction has been really powerful. So now this is the business of Foursquare. It's an API and SDK company. It's a data platform. They're currently doing over 1.1 billion API calls a day. Most of you, curious, who checked in on Foursquare when they got here today? About right, so like 0.5% of you. And I would bet the other 99.5% of you sent your location data by way of the Foursquare SDK and APIs through other apps that are using Foursquare to power location-aware services, like Uber, like your bank, like lots and lots of people. So they're doing over 1 billion API calls a day, and now over 90% of the company revenue is coming from the platform product, not the consumer product. And they're doing incredible things with it. This happened last year where, based on their foot traffic data, Foursquare was able to say, we think Chipotle is going to see a 30% drop in revenue at their next quarterly call. Guess what happened? A couple weeks later, 30% drop in same-store sales based on the data that's coming through the Foursquare network. And 90% of that data is not coming through the consumer app. So they built an enormously powerful product and a fabulous business in a very different way than they originally thought they were going to. This is a new one. It's not just for big companies that you've heard of. There's a very small company in our portfolio called Coco. Coco's mission is to bring emotional well-being to everyone. It's a great mission. Excuse me. The first product was an app in the iOS store where if you were feeling depressed or anxious, you could write a post and say, man, I'm so nervous about giving this talk. I'm sure it's going to suck. Everybody's going to hate me. And then other people will come onto the app and write supportive messages. And this was based on some MIT Media Lab science that said that by people helping each other with their anxiety and their depression using something called cognitive behavioral therapy, they themselves can improve their own well-being. So that the patients can be with one another. That's wonderful. Turns out it's kind of hard to get a consumer app off the ground. And then they said, well, maybe the consumer app's not the thing. Maybe we'll be a chatbot. And so they built a chatbot that plugged into Facebook and Reddit and Telegram and any chat platform and said, okay, maybe that's the way to get us distribution. We'll start chatting with people on these platforms and then bring them into our supportive network. And that was working pretty well too for a while. And even the decision to switch to that was like radical shift from the first app, the three-person company who thought that the first thing was the thing. 6 months later, it turns out that the second thing is not even really the thing. The thing that they realize is the thing is that by way of having all these supportive discussions happening inside of their platform on Messenger and in their own app, they're able to build a classifier that can tell when people are in crisis or distress, and they can use that to plug into social networks. And so when there's abuse or crisis or all these problems that happen on the social networks, their machine learning engine can flag a post and say, this person's in crisis, can triage them in an amazing chat, route them to crisis resources, and bring them back into the network in a supportive way. So now the product is a plugin for social networks. And this all happened over the course of 18 months. And so the product vision today is we are the empathy layer for products. Very different than we are a supportive social network, but the mission is still the same. And to watch the team go from we think this is what we're doing to we think this is what we're doing to now this is what we're doing, none of that would have worked if they weren't all able to really ground that in the purpose and the mission. That's number one. Okay, number two, build a goal hierarchy. I mentioned Angela Duckworth, the author who wrote this book, Grit. We gave this to all of our CEOs at the CEO Summit, really made an impact on us. And the idea that really stuck with me from Grit was this idea of a goal hierarchy. And Grit, by the way, is about perseverance. The point that she makes is that talent may not be the most important thing. Perseverance is what matters. Success is more a function of perseverance than necessarily talent. So how do you get people to persevere, especially when things are hard and things are confusing? And the point that I really took away from Grit was that you need to have a goal hierarchy. You need to merge the person's personal goals with the social goals, the purpose. Those two things need to be at the top, and every sub-goal needs to align with those things. And so if you're the kind of person, whether you're an individual or a person working in a company where you've got a bunch of low-level goals that don't necessarily add up to something higher, the minute that you fail at one of those low-level goals, you're more likely to give up if that is not connected up to the broader purpose. And so when we're talking about building resilient companies and companies with grit, the connection between the top-level purpose and everything underneath has to be strong because you need to persevere through a lot of hardship. And really this idea of connecting the purpose and the mission to the strategy is the thing that ties that together. So one of our portfolio companies is called Coinbase. Anybody here a Coinbase user? Store your Bitcoin in Coinbase? More of you probably will be over time. Coinbase is an amazing company. They store the most Bitcoin in the world. And I was at their all-hands meeting a couple months ago, and Brian Armstrong, the founder, walked up in front of the whole company and said, "What's our mission?" And everybody goes, "To create an open financial system for the world," in unison. Everybody knew the mission. Then he said, our strategy is to be the most trusted and the easiest to use. Our strategy is to be the most trusted and the easiest to use. And then he said, if you're working on one of those two things, you're doing the right thing. And I just kind of like hit me like a shockwave. I was like, wow, that's so simple and so clear. And in any company, you could be working on 1,000 different things, but we are going to be the most trusted and the most easy to use. And in the cryptocurrency space, those are actually pretty significant goals that are differentiated from the competition. I just felt like that was very powerful, and I've been telling this story to all of our founders. Another company that has gone through something recently is called Splice. Anybody here make digital music? Use Splice? Use Ableton? And use Ableton, but you don't use Splice? All right, Splice is like GitHub for music. If you make digital music, you can collaborate with people on Splice. It's a fabulous platform, and they've been growing like crazy. But a couple months ago, they were kind of in a strategic quagmire. There were a lot of big questions that they were wrestling with. They weren't sure how to answer them. And so they went into a process of discovery about who they are. It was actually run by the marketing department. And they built this internal book that they call the Splice book that really worked on their purpose, their practice, their mission, their values, who their customer is. They spent several months working internally to build this. They want to be the advocate for the modern musician. They want everything they do to confirm that they're in touch with those experiences, challenges, and ambitions. They did a lot of work to understand who is our user, how do we empathize with them. And then they came back with what do we stand for, sort of a set of values. And I was talking to the team the other day, and they said that this document was incredibly important, and even though it originated from the marketing department, it wasn't just about marketing language and what are we saying on Twitter. The product team and the engineering team were looking back at this document and using it as a touchstone. One of the engineers said something to the effect of, well, you know, all day long I sit and work on payments, and like that's cool, but I get kind of like I lose my mojo, and having this really makes me feel connected to what we're doing, and I think that's really powerful. And then the last one, this is a new company we just announced yesterday called Protocol Labs. They build internet infrastructure, things called IPFS and something coming out called Filecoin, which you probably wouldn't have heard of. But it's a small company, and I think they did a brilliant job of articulating their mission, which is very simple. We believe the internet has become humanity's most important technology. We build protocols, systems, and tools to improve how it works. And today we're focused on how we store, locate, and move information. What is the purpose? What is the mission? Who do we serve? What do we do? And what are we doing today? So that everybody knows what those things are and that they line up. Third, this one is super important, learning to say no. Brian touched on this, and it's so hard. At Union Square Ventures, one of the most valuable things that ever happened to us was the framework that Brad, who's one of the founders, put together that really helped us learn to say no. So this was the USV thesis, the investment thesis: invest in large networks of engaged users, differentiated by design, by user experience, and defensible through network effects. Like a tweet-sized strategy. And the thing that was so brilliant about that is it gave us a single question to ask any company that we met, and we meet thousands of companies every day. Is this a network? Does it have network effects? And does it have these characteristics? And there's lots of great things we see that aren't a network. And so if it is a network, yes, we go ahead. If it's not a network, no, we don't. And that one question, it was just enormously valuable for us to cut through and understand what to work on. A talk about investing wouldn't be complete without a picture of old white guys, specifically this old white guy who is Warren Buffett. And one of my favorite Warren Buffett stories, apparently at the beginning of every year, he makes a big list of all of his top goals. 25, 30, whatever your big top goals are. And then he circles the top 5. And then he takes the bottom 20, and anybody know what he does with the bottom 20?
He doesn't do them.
He doesn't do them. Avoid at all costs. Most people think, oh, maybe I'll get to those when I can, but he says, I will not do those bottom 20 things. And that is critical. Almost done. Another thing that came up at our CEO Summit, which I think is so brilliant, is thinking about what would we do in a given situation as a company that our competitors wouldn't do, and tell that story of how that differentiates us from the others. A really interesting company in our portfolio is called Cloudflare. They provide security and performance services for millions and millions of websites. They run 10% of internet traffic through their servers. You used it today, you didn't know it. It's a monster of a company. Because they sit in that privileged position of processing all this internet traffic, it creates some complicated questions for them about how to manage things in terms of policy. And they have said, because of our purpose and because of our values and our mission, we're going to take stands on issues about privacy and free speech and policy issues that threaten the health of the internet that other companies might not do. So they're fighting a patent troll aggressively right now who's using patents in a bad way to hurt tech companies. They've fought in court for 3 years in secret to protect the privacy of their users against a national security letter from the FBI. And recently, when they were struggling with some of their policies around abuse reports, and then they actually revised those policies in response to a lot of criticism that they got, they didn't just sort of respond to those criticisms, but they said, and here's why we think about things this way. We believe in anti-censorship on the internet, and we stand we will not be censors on the internet, and that's part of our core values, and here's why that matters to us as a company. And these principles have guided them to make some really tough calls over time, and they'll continue. Another one in our portfolio is called Nurix. They provide birth control that you can buy through an app very quickly. Fantastic product. And they did something that maybe not everybody would do, but right after the inauguration, when women's health was an issue, they said, well, we're gonna do marketing on using a promo code called Tiny Hands for everybody who's feeling threatened by Trump's policy. And this is a very sort of bold type of a campaign to put out there. And they said, that's who we are, that's part of our values, and that's part of our story. We would do this, and other companies might not do this. And then lastly, just to get a little more tactical, a couple of examples of ways to make purpose and mission and strategy tangible within a company, because it's really hard to take something so abstract and make it something that people feel every day. Amazing company, Twilio. Jeff Lawson, the founder, has created their 9 values for what it means to work at Twilio. And 9 because 7 plus or minus 2 apparently is the right number. If it's too few, they're too vague, like integrity. And if it's too many, no one will remember them. And so they've created 9 values that are concrete, specific. Each one has a subheading that puts that value into action to make it memorable. And the office has really taken these up. My favorite one is draw the owl. There's no instruction book. It's ours to draw, figure it out, ship it, and iterate, which is a twist on the internet meme, how to draw an owl. Step 1, draw 2 circles. Step 2, draw the rest of the fucking owl. Just go figure it out. That's one of their values. My friend in Boston, Jeff, runs this ad agency, Small Army. They print out the 20 principles for how they want to engage with their clients on playing cards, and everybody has them around the office. It's a little kitschy, but it works, and it makes it real, and makes it tangible, helps people remember it. At Codecademy, which is a platform that teaches people how to code, they bring users into their all-hands meeting every week. Real learners who are using their platform. And so this gets them away from the mad scientist problem and into we're really solving real problems for people. They don't wear suits, usually. Maybe this was Halloween or something. But and then another one that's really easy is making the board less mystical. So one of our portfolio companies, 2 Cows, they send the full board deck or most of the board deck around to the whole team after every board meeting. And a lot of the time where you're reiterating what is our purpose, what is our mission, what is our strategy, it's at the board. And I think a lot of times the staff feels no connection to that. So that's an easy one. And then this is the last example, Meetup, which has been around forever but is also in the process of reinventing themselves. Somebody internally made a small video describing Meetup in 2020, sort of a futuristic video of what kinds of products we're building and why and for whom. And they didn't think that this was going to be really necessarily impactful, but all of a sudden it caught like wildfire inside. And now all of a sudden, when they're road mapping the next year's worth of work, they're picking frames from the video that say oh yeah, this idea that was in the video, that maps to what these couple teams are going to be doing the next half of this year, and so on. And so sometimes something really simple, like a video that just illustrates a concept, can actually mean so much to a whole product and engineering team. So lastly, and back to the idea that no one feels like they're doing this right, and everybody feels like they're not doing it properly, and that everybody's always asking them questions that you're never done. It always feels like people don't know, and your job as a CEO is to constantly refine and tell the story again and again and again and again and again. With that, thank you very much. I'll be around all afternoon. I'll be at the pitch contest at 1 o'clock. Really appreciate it. Thanks.